At the edge of a winding valley, where fog lay like a woolen blanket over the land each morning, there stood a crooked little cottage with moss on its shingles and ivy curling around its chimney. The valley itself was Wondrous Hollow, named after the icy streams that crisscrossed it like silver veins. The cottage belonged to a woman named Thistlebrand, though everyone simply called her Thistle. She was neither young nor old, her face carried the glow of someone who had spent many years tending herbs and smiling at bees, but her eyes still danced when the wind rustled a secret through the trees. Her hair was a braid of silver and cinnamon, often tucked under a wide-brimmed hat decorated with feathers, dried flowers, and a pin shaped like a fox. The townsfolk of nearby Greenglass would often come by with ailments, empty bellies, or troubled dreams. Thistle had a knack for knowing what tea to steep, which herb to dry, or what story to tell by firelight. But few knew her best-kept secret. In her garden, past the rows of thyme, tucked behind a curtain of honeysuckle vines, was an old lantern hanging from a gnarled iron post. It was no ordinary lantern. It never ran out of oil, and its flame flickered in colors no fire ought to: soft greens, blush pinks, sometimes deep, starlit blue. Each evening, Thistle would step out in her knitted shawl and light the lantern, even on the brightest summer days. For the wandering ones, she'd murmur, as if explaining it to the night air. And truly, when the winds changed, and the veil between the worlds thinned like morning mist, quiet footsteps would pass down the mossy lane. Creatures of hoof and claw, beings with antlers and glowing eyes, the lost, the lonely, and those just curious, they came to the light. And Thistle, ever the lantern keeper, greeted them all with a warm smile and a mug of blackberry tea. One morning in early autumn, when the air was just cool enough to wear a second layer, a plump owl with speckled feathers and an officious attitude arrived with a scroll tied around its leg. It hooted twice, loud and firm, and tapped the window with a talon. Thistle opened the sash with a chuckle. "I suppose you want breakfast?" The owl looked unimpressed but waited patiently as she fetched a strip of smoked salmon and a handful of dried blueberries. After its meal, the owl extended its leg, letting Thistle untie the ribbon and unroll the parchment. Her eyes scanned the curling script. It was from the Council of Elderglen, a distant but important grove of witches, scholars, and magical caretakers. "Dear Lantern Keeper Thistlebrand," it began. "We have sensed an imbalance in the borderlands. Whispers speak of a tremor near the Weeping Woods, and one of our own, a young mage named Fenwick, has gone missing after being dispatched to investigate. We respectfully request your counsel and care in the matter." Thistle sighed softly. "Always around the turn of the season," she muttered, tracing a line at the edge of the page where protective sigils glowed faintly. "Well, can't let the lad go wandering off into wild magic alone." She poured another cup of dandelion tea and stared into the woods beyond her window. The lantern in her garden burned low even in daylight, its flame a warning orange today. The wandering ones would soon grow restless. And Thistle, as always, would be there with her lantern and her warm hearth. But first, she had to prepare. Thistlebrand didn't rush. She never did. A kettle took its time to boil, a tincture its time to steep, and a journey its time to unfold. She fetched her satchel from its hook near the fireplace, a thick, patchy leather bag with far more room inside than seemed natural. The satchel had once belonged to her grandmother, a hedge witch who had famously turned a goblin barrow into a rather successful mushroom farm. From the shelves and cupboards came a flurry of movement, bundles of sage wrapped in silver thread, jars of powdered root, sun-dried nettle crisps, an acorn flask of spring water blessed by river folk, and a squat bottle labeled, "Don't use unless screaming." She tucked in a hand-knitted scarf, a deck of weathered leaf cards, and a sleeping mouse named Flitch who lived inside her teacup. Flitch was partial to travel and enjoyed snuggling into the scarf where he could nap uninterrupted. Outside, the air had turned to that particular kind of chill that hinted at snow long before it arrived. Thistle tugged her shawl tighter and placed a hand on the lantern. Its flame shimmered in the daylight, now a pale blue. "Keep watch for me," she whispered. "If anyone comes seeking warmth, let them rest a while." The lantern pulsed softly, and for a moment, a fox-like shadow rippled along the garden stones, though nothing stood there. Thistle nodded, as if to someone unseen, then turned toward the woods. The path to Weeping Woods was not straight. It curled and doubled back, as if it didn't want to be followed. Trees with silver bark leaned over the trail like old men eavesdropping, and sometimes the wind brought whispers that said nothing in particular but still made the hairs on the back of one's neck rise. Thistle hummed softly as she walked, a tune older than memory and gentler than rain. Her steps crunched through red leaves and pine needles. By midday, she stopped at a small glade where an old pine had dropped an unusual gift, a ring of blue pine cones around its trunk. Thistle crouched down and plucked one up. It was warm. "Ah," she said. "Someone's been stirring magic here." Blue pine cones were a sign of portal disturbance. Young mages often didn't notice when their spells left crumbs behind, like sugar trails leading straight to them. She followed the pinecone trail deeper into the woods, each one leading to another, like breadcrumbs left for someone who knew how to read them. By dusk, the trail led to a quiet clearing. At its center was a pack of woolen blankets, half a loaf of traveler's bread, and a book with loose pages flapping in the breeze. No mage. No footprints. Thistle sat cross-legged and waited. The fog came in around twilight, thick and slow like soup simmering in a cold pot. Thistle lit a small charm lantern from her bag, its light golden and steady. Somewhere in the mist, she heard a twig snap. "Come out, Fenwick," she called, before something without a name does. A head popped through the fog like a startled squirrel. It belonged to a young man with tangled red hair, crooked glasses, and a robe too long for him. He looked like a librarian who had accidentally wandered into a forest and immediately regretted it. "Oh, thank the roots, someone real," he said, stumbling forward. "I thought I was looping again." Thistle helped him sit. "You were," she said. "The Weeping Woods don't like to be interrupted. You've pulled at the thread, and now the pattern's resisting." Fenwick blinked. "Is that metaphor?" "It's forest logic," she said. "Now, tell me what you did." "I opened a gateway," Fenwick admitted, "just a small one, to peek into the old realm. I read about a place where memory takes form, and I wanted to see." "Let me guess," Thistle interrupted gently. "It saw you back?" He nodded miserably. "Well," she said, handing him a cup of calming tea from her satchel, "you've a good heart, and you didn't turn into a puddle of teeth and shadows. That's a start." They sat together as the fog thinned. Somewhere beyond them, the trees shifted, not in wind, but in mood. They had noticed her. By morning, Fenwick was better. A night of tea, sleep, and listening to Thistle's stories had calmed the flurry inside him. The boy had talent, raw and wild, but no training in respect. "Magic doesn't like being stared at," Thistle had told him. "It's like a cat. Curious, proud, and it'll bite if you prod it." Together they followed the faint pull toward the old realm Fenwick had breached. The forest grew stranger the farther they went, bark shimmered like obsidian, and roots curled in runes no one had carved. Eventually, they reached a glade where the air smelled like old parchment and candle wax. At the center stood a stone basin filled with silver mist. Reflections danced on its surface, glimpses of people, homes, entire days long forgotten. "This," Thistle said, "is the memory grove. Very few know it exists. Even fewer can approach it without being pulled under." Fenwick stared. "What is it showing?" "Things that once were. Things that ache to be again." A figure took shape in the mist, a tall, proud woman with storm-gray hair. She smiled at Thistle. "Mother?" Fenwick asked softly. Thistle shook her head. "Not yours." The mist coiled, and the smile vanished. "I think your gateway toward the edge of this grove," Thistle murmured. "And something from inside has wandered out." Fenwick looked pale. "Do we put it back?" "No," Thistle said. "We invite it home." They followed the ripple left by the thing that had escaped the grove. It wasn't a trail in the ordinary sense, no bent twigs or muddy prints, but a strange sort of pressure in the air, like the hush before a thunderclap. Birds avoided it. Even the moss had turned a shade more gray. "What exactly is it?" Fenwick asked. Whatever came out. Thistle didn't answer at first. She paused to gather a handful of brittle mushrooms whose caps pulsed with a pale glow and tucked them into her pouch. Only when they reached a ring of stones grown over with ivy did she finally speak. "It's a memory that doesn't belong to anyone," she said. "Something forgotten too thoroughly. Untethered things like that try to become real again, by attaching themselves to someone. Anyone." Fenwick swallowed hard. "So, like a ghost?" "No. A ghost knows it was once alive." She gave him a thin smile. "This thing? It only knows that it was. It wants shape. Voice. Place." They set a small ward circle for the night, woven from string thistle, powdered pepper root, and a ring of lantern flies. Thistle watched the flickering edge of the forest as Fenwick drifted to sleep. In the silence, a voice brushed her thoughts. "You remember me?" Thistle opened one eye. Nothing was there. No breeze, no shadow. But her lantern, tucked by her side, had dimmed to a slow, flickering red. "I do," she whispered, voice barely a thread. "But I'm not who you need." The wood said nothing more. But the air grew colder. The next morning, they reached a narrow stream that wound like silver thread through the trees. Its water shimmered oddly, reflecting not sky or trees, but a cottage. Her cottage. Fenwick frowned. "But, that's miles away." Thistle crouched by the water. "The old realm bleeds sometimes. And right now, it's bleeding into me." She dipped her hand into the stream. Ripples flared outward, and the image changed. Now it showed her garden. The lantern flickered violently, and standing before it was a child. Pale, unsure, and blurred at the edges like a painting half finished. "Is that?" "The memory," Thistle said. "It's found a way to look like something. A beginning." They crossed the stream, not on stones or bridges but on memory itself. Each step was a thought from long ago, the smell of a rain-damp shawl, the taste of lemon balm, the hush of her first snowfall alone. Fenwick kept silent, sensing the sacredness of it. When they emerged, they were in a clearing that did not exist in any map. And yet, it felt unmistakably home. There was a small hearth built of river stones, and beside it, a wooden bench carved with the sigils of the lantern keepers. It had waited for her. "I was a child here," Thistle said softly, sitting down. "When I was taken in. I'd forgotten this place existed." Fenwick looked around, eyes wide. "So this is your memory?" She nodded. "And it's where we'll meet it." The fire lit itself at dusk. No spark, no flint. Just sudden warmth. The clearing came alive with soft light, and the fog that clung to the treetops parted. It came from the dark as a shimmer, like heat off stone, but took shape with every step. A child, no more than 10, dressed in a wool tunic too big for her, with hair like straw and eyes the color of wet ash. Her feet were bare, but she did not shiver. Fenwick inhaled sharply. "That's not real." "It is now," Thistle whispered. "Because I remember." The thing tilted its head. "You left me," it said, and the voice was like leaves falling in reverse. "You promised we'd keep warm." Thistle's eyes didn't waver. "You were a dream I had to let go. A shadow I outgrew." The child blinked, and for a moment the illusion flickered, showing something tall and faceless beneath. Then the child smiled again. "But I remember you." It stepped closer, and Fenwick moved to protect Thistle, but she held up a hand. "Let it finish." The child reached out, touching the hem of Thistle's shawl. "Let me come back with you." "You already have," Thistle said gently. "Every time I lit the lantern. Every time I let someone in from the cold." The child paused. Then its shape softened. It dissolved like mist in sunrise. What remained behind was a single blue pine cone, still warm. They returned to the cottage in the early hours, just before dawn. Thistle hung her satchel by the door, tucked Flitch into his teacup with a sunflower seed, and set the pinecone gently on the mantel. Fenwick sat in the rocking chair, blanket over his knees, still trying to process all he'd seen. "So," he asked finally, "that memory, was it dangerous?" Thistle poked at the fire. "Only if I had tried to bury it. Some things, you keep. Others, you let go." He nodded, then blinked. "Wait. Did we ever close the tear?" She smiled at him over her teacup. "No need. The realm just wanted to know it was still loved." Outside, the lantern still burned. And as the sun peeked over the valley, a pair of wide antlers could be seen, briefly, at the edge of the trees, watching, then disappearing. 3 days passed without unusual visitors, no fog that spoke, no creatures from forgotten groves. Just the soft, steady rhythm of ordinary magic, drying herbs, baking thistle bread, and mending a sock that insisted on vanishing only its toe. Then the owl returned. It arrived just past midday with a crispness in its feathers and a sense of urgency in its hoot. Thistle opened the window before it knocked. "I was wondering when I'd hear from them again," she murmured. This letter was smaller, and written in lavender ink. As Thistle read, her brow furrowed deeper. "Well?" Fenwick asked, sitting cross-legged on the floor while sorting jars of honey leaf and bitterroot. "They want me to inspect a village near the edge of the lavender fields," she said. "Something's gone odd there. People say the flowers are blooming memories. Full conversations. Secrets. Things no one told anyone else." Fenwick looked up sharply. "That's not supposed to happen." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She folded the letter and tucked it into her satchel, already reaching for travel socks and a weatherproof cloak. "You're coming too," she added. Fenwick stood. "I figured." The road to the lavender fields was long, but friendly. It passed through apple orchards with low branches, past roadside inns with sweet potato stew, and winding brooks where the fish leapt like laughter. By dusk on the third day, they crested a low hill and saw them, acres upon acres of soft violet, swaying under moonlight. The scent was rich and drowsy. Fenwick yawned before they even reached the village. But Thistle stiffened. "They're too tall," she said. "Lavender doesn't grow this fast." Sure enough, the stalks reached knee-height. At the base of one, Thistle found a bloom cupped open like a hand, and inside, swirling mist. She leaned closer. It whispered, "He never meant to leave." She straightened, eyes narrowing. "They're speaking memory." Fenwick looked pale. "That's not from the people who live here, is it?" "No," she said. "It's from the field." The village of Elderbunch sat like a puddle among the lavender. Small stone homes, mossy roofs, and smoke curling from wide chimneys. Everything smelled of honey, bread, and warm wood. But the villagers were restless. "I saw my mother," one baker whispered to Thistle. "She's been gone 20 years. But she walked right past the mill, holding her blue parasol, humming the song she always sang at harvest." Another, an old gardener, swore his scarecrow moved at night, and whispered poems he wrote as a boy but never said aloud. "It's not just the flowers," Thistle murmured to Fenwick as they settled in the guest house. "Something's opened a deep root here." They traced the pattern to a farm on the outskirts. There, a man named Dunley lay in a bed of petals, eyes shut, breathing slow. "Hasn't woken in 3 days," said his sister. "Just sleeps and grows the lavender." "Grows?" "He dreamed of it, always. Said he wanted the fields to go on forever." Thistle stepped close. The air shimmered around him. Lavender sprouted from his fingertips. She nodded grimly. "He's dreaming the memory into life. And it's becoming too strong." They prepared a brew that night. One made from thistle leaf, moon mint, and a pearl of mind root that Thistle had saved for emergencies. "If I drink this, I'll step into his dreaming," Thistle said. Fenwick looked alarmed. "You'll go into his dream?" "Yes. To coax the memory loose. Or sever it, if I must." She sat beside Dunley and drank. Everything shifted. She opened her eyes not in the room, but in a field of endless lavender, far taller than her head. The sky was soft and purple, and every flower hummed a lullaby. "Hello?" she called. A shape stepped through the lavender. Dunley, younger than in life, eyes bright and coat patched with constellations. "I never wanted to leave," he said. "Here, everything is safe." "You're hurting your village," Thistle said gently. "You're trapping them in your memory." "But it's good here." "I know," she said. "But memory is meant to be carried, not lived inside." He looked down. "Will it fade?" "Not if we plant it," she said. "Together." In the dream, Thistle guided Dunley to a clearing in the lavender, an untouched space with soil the color of old parchment. She knelt and placed a seed there, coaxed from the brew, whispering a spell as old as time. Dunley placed his hand beside hers. The lavender quieted. When Thistle woke, the flowers had begun to shrink back. Dunley stirred in his sleep, and moments later, opened his eyes. "What?" he whispered. "You dreamed your field into life," Thistle said. "Now it's time to dream something new." He cried, softly, not from sorrow, but from relief. They stayed 2 more days. The lavender returned to normal height, and while it still smelled sweeter than usual, it no longer whispered things it shouldn't. Thistle and Fenwick sat beneath a cherry tree as children played nearby, picking bits of lavender for bouquets. "Is this what it's always like?" Fenwick asked. "Being a lantern keeper?" Thistle smiled into her tea. "No. Sometimes it's mending socks and baking hazelnut muffins." He leaned back, sighing. "I hope the next thing is muffins." But far away, in the old realm, the lantern flickered. Something else had stirred. Thistle returned to her cottage with Fenwick in tow. Autumn had deepened in her absence, pumpkins nestled on porches, leaves scattered in wild confetti across paths, and her mailbox had been overtaken by enterprising spiders. Inside, the hearth still held a faint ember, and the lantern on the garden hook burned a deep indigo. "A storm color," Thistle murmured. "Something's shifting again." That night, as the wind picked up and a faint drizzle painted the windows, she sat with a notebook of dreams. She kept one for each year, pages of sketched oddities and riddles that visited her while she slept. Tonight's dream had been different. She saw a tree with no bark, but hundreds of carved faces in its trunk, some crying, some laughing, others unfinished. At its roots was a door made of moonlight, and on it a riddle. "I am given away but never lost. I grow in silence and disappear in noise. What am I?" Thistle tapped the page thoughtfully. "Memory," Fenwick guessed. She looked up. "No. That's too easy. The tree is memory. This is its guardian." Fenwick frowned. "So?" Thistle's eyes gleamed. "It's trust." They packed the next morning, following the lantern's pull. Its color, indigo streaked with silver, was a signal only the oldest lantern keepers remembered. They traveled north, past the frost line where birds with frost-laced feathers wheeled in silence, and where the river spoke in murmurs beneath glassy ice. On the 3rd night, they found the tree. It stood alone on a rise overlooking a grove. No bark, as in the dream, just faces carved from the wood itself. The moonlit door was real. As they approached, the tree trembled. A voice echoed from inside, not menacing, not kind. Just curious. "What do you bring that has no weight?" Thistle stepped forward and said, clearly, "Trust." The door opened. Inside was not a hollow, but a memory made real. Endless corridors made of tree rings, shelves holding jars filled with flickering scenes, a child's laughter, a soldier's last prayer, a song once sung by a grandmother while shelling peas. "Fenwick," Thistle said softly, "this is the archive of the forgotten." They wandered carefully. Each jar pulsed faintly as they passed, tugging at the edge of the mind. "Don't look too long," Thistle warned. "They'll pull you in." At the heart of the tree sat a being. neither male nor female, not human nor beast. It had antlers of oak, eyes like river stones, and hands that flickered between bark and bone. "I know you," it said, voice echoing from all sides. Thistle bowed slightly. "I lit the lantern the day your name was last spoken." The being nodded. "And still, you remember me. Why call me now?" "Something is stealing from the archive," the keeper said. "Whole memories. Not fading, taken. Someone is trying to rewrite what has been." Fenwick's face paled. "Who would do that?" The keeper's gaze drifted. "Someone who has learned to harvest memory, not to preserve it, but to control it." They left the archive as the tree sealed behind them, and followed a trail of fractured memory, places where history should have been but wasn't. Villages that recalled births but no childhoods. Songs with lyrics missing their meaning. Names, once common, now spoken with hesitation. One night, they found a fog-bound glen where even sound struggled to stay. There, a figure waited. Cloaked in shadow, its shape blurred, sometimes childlike, sometimes aged. Its face was smooth like wax, shifting with emotion but never settling. "You seek what I've taken?" it asked. "We seek what belongs to everyone," Thistle replied. The thief tilted its head. "They forgot. I only helped." "You stole," Fenwick said. "You made them forget themselves." "I made them peaceful," the thief whispered. "No grief. No shame. No wars." Thistle's voice was soft. "And no joy. No love. No learning." The fog thickened. "You can't have it all," the thief hissed. "Some memories are too sharp. Which is why we carry them together," Thistle said. Then she did what no one else had done. She opened her lantern. The lantern flared, not gold, not blue, but every color at once. Fire like sunrise, ocean, starlight, and rain. The thief recoiled. And then it broke apart, not violently, but as if unbuttoned from the world. Its shape scattered into fragments of forgotten truths, a lullaby, a kiss goodbye, a whispered apology. Each fragment floated, seeking home. As the fog thinned, the memories returned to their places. Laughter returned to villages. Tears found purpose. Stories rebalanced. Thistle closed the lantern. Fenwick wept. "That was beautiful." She smiled tiredly. "It was necessary." They returned home after weeks of travel, wind-chafed and sore-kneed but filled with something close to peace. The lantern, hung once again on its old post, burned with a steady golden light. Thistle's cottage welcomed them like a long-lost friend. The ivy curled in greeting, the hearth exhaled warmth, and Flitch, the mouse, squeaked indignantly from his teacup as if to say, "Where have you been?" Thistle unpacked slowly. She cleaned the satchel, hung her shawl, and placed the warm pinecone from the memory grove beside a vase of autumn flowers. Fenwick, once content to read in corners, now wandered the herb shelves with practiced familiarity. "You've changed," Thistle said over evening tea. Fenwick smiled. "I've grown." She raised an eyebrow. "Well," he amended, "at least I think before touching things now." She laughed, a sound full of spice and smoke and worn joy. Outside, the first snow began to fall. Silent, soft, like a memory gently returning. The knock came at midnight. Not at the door, but on the glass of the back window, a sharp, polite tap. Thistle opened it with a knowing sigh. "Took you long enough." Perched on the windowsill was a figure wearing robes of midnight moss and snow-powdered antlers. Its eyes glowed faintly like embers beneath ice. "Lantern keeper," it said, with a voice like frost crackling. "I thought the pale court only visited in deep winter." "It's deeper than usual," the figure replied. "And something walks the drifted paths." Fenwick peeked in. "What are the drifted paths?" "Where snow covers what once was," Thistle said. "A place of sleeping stories." The pale herald placed a hand, gloved in starlight, on the windowsill. "It awakens." Thistle nodded solemnly. "We'll come." The journey took them past maps and memories, north of the hollow hills, where the snow was too fine to hold shape, and wind carved lullabies into the rocks. The drifted paths were not roads, but memories buried beneath snow. Thistle wore her warmest coat, threaded with silver charms. Fenwick had grown a beard, half by accident, and walked taller now. They reached a crossroads at dusk. There, a stone marker read, "Here lies the story of Salantha, the flame that walked." Fenwick brushed snow from another stone. "Here rests Nara the Binding, who sang peace from war. Dozens more like them. Forgotten heroes, each buried in snow, not their bones, but their deeds." "This is a graveyard of stories," he whispered. Thistle nodded. "And something is trying to keep them buried." At the heart of the path stood a frozen pool. Beneath its surface burned a single ember, a story not yet told, or not yet finished. Thistle knelt beside it. "This is the flame they buried. It's why the snow doesn't melt." "What story is it?" Fenwick asked. She touched the ice and winced. "Mine." The wind stilled. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Fenwick said, "You never told me about the storm at Brightwater. The flood that banished an entire valley." Thistle's eyes were distant. "I was there. I opened the lantern too wide. I tried to save too many." "And the flood?" "It wasn't water," she said. "It was grief." She looked at the ice again. "I locked this away." Thistle and Fenwick built a fire on the ice, carefully, respectfully. Around them, the pale herald watched in stillness. She lit the lantern one more time and placed it atop the firewood. No flames rose. But warmth did. A memory emerged from the ice, Thistle, younger, soaked in light and sorrow, kneeling beside a child made of rain. Villagers vanishing into floods of memory too painful to hold. And Thistle, standing alone at the end, whispering, "Forget me." The scene faded. But Fenwick reached out, took her hand. "We remember." And with that, the ice cracked gently. The ember rose. The flame flickered into the sky, then broke into dozens of smaller sparks, each one a name, a tale, a truth once buried. They drifted down to the grave markers. Each stone began to glow. "Are they returning?" Fenwick asked. Thistle nodded. "The world doesn't forget. It just waits to be reminded." They sat in the snow until morning, watching the wind carry the warmth to faraway places. The pale herald bowed before them. "The drifted paths are quiet again." Thistle rose slowly. "Then we'll go home." But as they turned to leave, a new path opened behind them, lined with frost-lit candles and steps that shimmered like glass. A path neither had seen before. The candles gave off no smoke, and the glass path rang faintly with each step, like a chime strung in the wind. Thistle and Fenwick walked side by side, cloaked in silence. Snow still fell, but only around them, the path itself remained untouched. "I've never seen a path like this," Fenwick said. "It feels deliberate." "It is," Thistle murmured. "This was made for us. Or rather, for what we've become." The path led into a cavernous hollow hidden beneath a veil of stone and snow. Within stood 7 thrones made of elements: flame, water, wind, stone, light, shadow, and silence. Each was empty. Except the one of silence. It held a woman who wore a robe of woven ashen moonbeams. Her face was neither young nor old, and her voice was not spoken aloud. "Lantern Keeper Thistlebrand. Apprentice Fenwick. Do you know what you've become?" "I do not," Thistle said. "Good." The woman smiled. "Then you are still worthy." The woman introduced herself as Sela of Silence, the last of the 7 attendants. "The others," she said, gesturing to the empty thrones, "have faded into story. I remain to watch for the signs." "What signs?" Fenwick asked. "When the story forgets itself. When memory begins to fray. When flame, wind, and shadow argue, and no one remembers who began the tale." She stood. You've done more than tend a lantern, Thistlebrand. You've mended old stories, woven peace into forgotten corners, and guided memory home. The flame you carry is no longer just for the wandering ones. It is part of the loom. Thistle inhaled sharply. The loom still exists? Sela's gaze flickered. Barely. But it can be restored. Sela led them deeper into the cavern, to a chamber where 7 spindles of impossible thread spun in place, fraying, tangling, twitching with the tension of unwoven magic. This is what holds our world together, she said. Not walls or maps. Not spells or swords. Story. Each spindle held a different kind of thread, glimmering, braided, smoke-thin, wild with color, and one that was nearly invisible. The loom listens to those who remember. To those who carry light. She turned to Thistle. You are not just a lantern keeper. You are a weaver. Sela placed a small spool into Thistle's hand, thread that shimmered like twilight over water. You've earned the right to add a thread. Something true. Something you know. Thistle hesitated. Then she said, softly. Even broken stories can be beautiful again. The thread pulsed and slipped into the loom. It did not repair. It grew. New lines formed. Gaps closed. Forgotten figures stepped back into view. And far away, the lantern at her cottage flared brighter than ever before. Fenwick reached for a thread, but Sela held up a hand. Not yet. Yours is still unfolding. But I want to help. You are helping, Thistle said. You carry the story onward. Sela smiled. You are what we once called a story walker. You will carry the tale between villages, through winters and wars, teaching others to listen. Fenwick blinked. So. I'm a storyteller? Not quite, Sela said. You are a story reminder. Fenwick rubbed his chin. Does it come with a cloak? Sela's smile deepened. If you live long enough. They returned to the cottage not by road, but by thread. The world had changed in small ways. Flowers bloomed in places that had long forgotten spring. The stars moved more gently. The wind whistled old lullabies again. The lantern in Thistle's garden burned steadily, its flame now touched with thread-like strands that shimmered even in daylight. She tended her herbs. Fenwick read to the village children. Flitch finally accepted a second mouse into his teacup. And once a month, they lit a second lantern for stories too shy to walk alone. The world, like a well-tended hearth, was warm again. For now. Winter faded. Spring crept in with birdsong and thawing moss, and Thistle's garden yawned open with color. But the lantern began to grow heavier. Not visibly, its weight in her hand was the same, but each evening when Thistle went to light it, she felt it pulling. A weight in her chest, not her arm. As though the stories within it had begun to stir restlessly. Do you feel it? She asked Fenwick one morning as they walked to gather nettle shoots. He nodded, face shadowed. It's like it's listening harder. Like it's waiting for something. It's always waiting, she murmured. But this is different. That night, when she lit it, the flame danced green. Green was the color of questions. The visitor came at dusk, a boy no older than 12, barefoot and quiet as fog. He stood just outside the light of the lantern. I don't know who I am, he said softly. Thistle beckoned him forward, wrapped a shawl around his shoulders, and brought him inside. He had no name. No memories. Just a sense of having walked for a very long time. The only thing he carried was a single feather, golden and warm to the touch. She examined it under a glass. It's from a dawnwing, she said, voice tinged with awe. What's that? The boy asked. A bird that only exists in stories too old for words. The lantern's flame flickered violet, surprise and recognition. Fenwick stared. So he's from a story? No, Thistle said. He is one. For days they cared for the boy. Fed him stews, read him tales, sang old songs to see which ones his eyes reacted to. He never cried. Not even once. His name was taken, Thistle said to Fenwick over a pot of soup. I've seen it before, when a name is unmade, the self dims. Can we give him a new one? Thistle shook her head. He must choose it. It must feel like truth. The next day, the boy pointed at a bluebird perched on the garden fence. Is that a kind of finch? Fenwick grinned. Close. The boy nodded. I think I like finch. And just like that, the lantern pulsed once, bright and sure. That night, Finch dreamed of feathers falling upward, of hills that breathed like sleeping giants, and of a mountain split down the middle with gold light spilling from the crack. He told Thistle over breakfast. She stirred her tea. That's a place. Real, though few remember it. What is it? She looked toward the far hills. It's the spine of light. And if it's stirring, we'll have to go. They packed for another journey, this time slower, more deliberate. Thistle made bundles of wake leaf and emberthorn. Fenwick brought his growing collection of memory jars. He'd started preserving small moments in crystal flasks. Finch packed a small satchel with dried apples, a feather quill, and a stone that had whispered to him once. They set off with spring wind behind them and the lantern tucked safely beneath Thistle's shawl. The road was quiet for 2 days. Then came the crows. The crows followed them, silent and too many. They perched on fence posts and trees and rocks, watching. On the third night, they spoke, not aloud, but in the cracks of the firewood and in the rustle of leaves. Turn back. Not yours to mend. The spine is sealed. Thistle remained calm. They're not real crows. Finch shivered. Then what are they? Fragments, Fenwick said. Broken thoughts looking for shape. The lantern's flame turned a steady gold. Truth. Finch stared up at the birds. I think they're afraid of me. He stood slowly and held up the feather. The crows scattered like ash in the wind. It took 6 more days to reach the spine of light. The mountain was taller than memory, cut clean through the middle by a glowing seam. Trees at its base bent toward it. The very air felt charged, like before a thunderstorm. There's something inside, Finch whispered. Something calling. Thistle took his hand. We'll go together. They stepped into the crack. Inside was a hall made of living stone. Stories glowed faintly in the walls, images of firebirds, rivers that spoke, sky that wept when names were lost. And at the center, a pedestal. Upon it, a lantern just like Thistle's. But this one was cold. Finch stepped forward, trembling. This is mine, he said. The lantern on the pedestal was dusty, untouched for an age, but not dead. As Finch placed his hand on it, a shimmer rippled through the stone beneath their feet. The lantern flickered, dim at first, then caught with a flame so pale it was nearly white. It's not lit with fire, Thistle whispered. It's lit with identity. Finch blinked, then smiled, not shyly, but with wonder. I remember. Memories rushed back into him, not as images or voices, but as a sense of place. A role. A duty. I was a lantern bearer of the Dawnward Watch. Before things unraveled. Before we scattered. Fenwick took a step forward. There were others? Finch nodded slowly. 7 of us. Each with a lantern tied to a different part of the loom. When the loom frayed, so did we. And your name? Thistle asked gently. Finch's eyes shone. My name is Finch now. The old name is gone. And that's okay. The mountain pulsed softly as Finch lifted his lantern. Its light didn't push back darkness, it curled through it, like thread through fabric. It doesn't banish, he said. It invites. They left the hall and walked down the cracked slope. And all around them, the forest leaned in, not threatening, but curious. Listening. What do we do now? Fenwick asked. Thistle stared at the horizon. We find the other lanterns. But we don't even know where they are, he said. Thistle smiled. No. But I know where to begin. She held up her own lantern. Inside the flame, a spiral had formed, pointing west. The town of Mosswood was built around a well that side. Not loudly, and not all the time, just now and then, like a sleeping person trying to remember something. It started 3 months ago, said the village baker. At first we thought it was wind. But then it began saying names. Finch, now more confident, held his lantern up to the well. Its flame curled, then brightened. There's something beneath it, he said. Not water. Not stone. Something bound. They lowered a thread into the well, literally. One of the loom threads, guided by Thistle's steady hand. At the bottom, it snagged. Pull gently, she murmured. Together, they lifted up a shard of glass. Inside it swirled a flame the color of thunderclouds. Lantern 2 had been found. That night, they placed the shard in the center of their circle. As moonlight touched it, the shard shimmered, and a figure stepped from the shadows. Broad-shouldered, wrapped in cloaks of midnight, with eyes full of storm. I remember pain, he said, voice low. I remember being torn apart when the loom faltered. Who are you? Finch asked. I was Orin, bearer of the stormlight lantern. He looked at Finch. You've lit yours again. Yes. Then I follow you. Just like that, the shard became whole, a lantern once more, pulsing with deep gray light. Orin bowed. Where to next? They followed the spiral again, which now rotated in both Thistle's and Finch's lanterns. The path led them to an island suspended in a river that flowed backward. A place of stillness, where time had paused. There they found Leary, bearer of the echo flame. She was a singer who remembered every note of every song ever sung, but no names. With her lantern restored, 3 were now lit. Next came Maylin, hidden in a ruin beneath the roots of a sleeping tree. She was the bearer of the emberlight, quiet and fierce, who had bound a broken war beneath her lantern's glow. 4. Then came Wren, the watcher on the lake, whose lantern reflected truth others were too afraid to speak. Her eyes had seen too much. But her lantern still burned, just barely. 5. Only 2 remained. And the world had begun to notice. Wherever the lantern-bearers walked, the world changed slightly. Rain fell a little sweeter. Old songs returned to birds. Children dreamed more vividly. Even sorrow grew cleaner, as if sadness no longer feared being remembered. But not all were pleased. In the farthest reaches, something moved in the spaces between stories, a being who had once tried to unmake the loom and had nearly succeeded. Its name was never spoken. Its form was never fixed. But it whispered through cracks in memory and threaded doubt like poison through dreams. And it had noticed the lanterns. Thistle was the first to hear it. A tearing sound, low, deep, wrong. In her dreams, the garden split. The lantern post cracked in 2. The flame sputtered, flickering through all its colors at once. She woke in a cold sweat. Something's attacking the loom directly, she said. Finch, lantern glowing at his side, nodded grimly. We have to find the last bearers. Now. The spiral lantern glow now burned more urgently, rotating faster and with uneven pulses, like a heartbeat under stress. It's in the cliffs, said Orin, brow furrowed. Somewhere sharp. Somewhere the wind never sleeps. They crossed overland to the jagged spirelands, where peaks rose like broken spears from the earth and silence fell heavier than snowfall. At the base of the highest crag, they found her. A woman suspended upside down in a cocoon of wind and thread, eyes closed but glowing beneath her lids. She's dreaming, said Leary, voice hushed. And the dream is keeping her bound. Thistle nodded. We'll have to wake her gently, or risk tearing the dream apart. They surrounded her with lantern light. Each bearer hummed a note, guided by Leary's memory of the old tune, and slowly the threads of sleep loosened. Her name was Asa, and her lantern, lightless and sharp-edged, was known as the Gale Flame. "I remember falling," she said when she awoke. "And I remember who pushed me." Her eyes narrowed. "It's still out there." The final flame could not be found. The spiral pulsed, but erratically. Threads of guidance blurred and twisted. "It's being hidden," Maylan said. "Something's covering it with false memories." "It's worse than that," Thistle murmured. "I think it's moving." And then, one night, as their campfire dwindled to coals, a figure appeared. Not from shadow, but from story, woven whole from discarded lines and cast-off endings. It wore a half-formed face and eyes that changed each time it blinked. "Looking for me?" it asked. They rose slowly. "Who are you?" Finch asked. "I am the bearer of nothing. The lanternless one. The lost flame." "No," said Thistle. "You're not a bearer. You're what was made when a lantern broke." The being smiled. "Close enough." Then it vanished into the sky, leaving behind only ash. The loom shuddered the next morning. Clouds lost their shapes. Rivers forgot their names. Children woke up silent, unable to recall dreams, or words. "It's begun," Asa said. Thistle lit her lantern in broad daylight. Its flame flickered violently, struggling to hold shape. "We have to restore the seventh," she said. "Or remake it." Fenwick turned. "Can that be done?" Everyone looked at Thistle. She paused, then answered, "It can. But it will cost something." In the weaving hollow, where they had once stood before the great loom, the threads were fraying visibly now. Colors dulled. Shape sagged. Sela of Silence waited. "You know what must be done," she said softly. Thistle nodded. "A new lantern must be born." The bearers formed a ring around the central spindle. Each held their lantern high, light merging into a single rising glow. Finch stepped forward. "I will carry it." Thistle reached into her shawl and pulled free her own lantern. "This one has burned long enough," she whispered. She handed it to Sela. Sela nodded, and poured its light into the loom. A new thread formed, white and woven with every hue. It curled toward Finch's waiting hand. The new lantern burned like memory at dawn. It had no name at first, just warmth, a presence, and a sense of long-lost melody. Finch held it with quiet reverence. "It's not just mine," he said. "It's everyone's." "Yours too, Thistle." She smiled through tears. "No. It's yours now." The other bearers gathered around. "This is what will steady the loom," Lauren said. "Not force. Not perfection. Just willingness." They lit their lanterns together. 7 flames rising. The loom pulsed once, and began to hum. But the lanternless one had not disappeared. It had only waited. When the loom shimmered brightest, it struck. A spear of silence pierced the hollow. All lanterns flickered. The bearers fell to their knees. Only Finch remained standing. The lanternless one emerged, voice echoing in overlapping tones. "You think light can undo what I am?" Finch stepped forward, lantern raised. "No," he said. "But light doesn't undo. It remembers." He opened the lantern fully. Inside was not fire, but a memory. A face, long ago. A child, lost, abandoned by the old order. "You were one of us once," Finch said. "But they let you be forgotten." The being paused. Shivered. Cracked. Lanternous one knelt. Its form dissolved, not destroyed, but welcomed. The loom accepted the lost thread. Not to erase it. To weave it in. Finch watched as it became a new thread in the tapestry, deep blue, lined with sorrow and softness. "Every broken story belongs," he whispered. The lanterns burned anew. The world exhaled. The sky began to sing again. They returned home. the lantern post had been rebuilt. The garden thrived. Children visited more often. Finch stayed for a time, telling stories to those who needed them. But eventually, he walked onward, lantern in hand, to the next village, and the next. Fenwick stayed by the hearth, now a story walker in truth. And Thistle? She sat on the porch, knitting and sipping tea, smiling at the lantern that no longer burned alone. The world had remembered itself. And it was warm again. The end. At dawn, when dew still clung to the curling moss and the mushroom caps wore their morning mist like sleepy crowns, the glade beneath the redcap canopy began to stir. Tiny doors creaked open in homes carved from hazelnut shells and hollow twigs. Ladders of woven vine lowered gently from petal balconies. Pollen dust twirled in the light like slow snowfall. And under the warm lip of a gold-laced mushroom, Tansy Midgewing stirred a pot of clover broth, humming a tune no bigger than a breath. Tansy was mosskind, small and soft-footed, woven of memory, moss, and leafy fiber. She wore a belt of thimble tools and a cloak stitched from mothwing cast-offs. Her hair was wild with burrs and green curls, and her eyes were the color of morning tea left out in sunlight. She lived in a cap den, a cozy burrow grown into the stem curve of a great dapple mushroom, its gills humming with slow fungal magic. Outside her round little window, the glade was waking. She paused her stirring, took a breath, and whispered, "Today's the day." Then she looked to the corner shelf. Upon it rested an egg. Not a bird's egg, no birds dared enter the mushroom wilds, but a smooth, glimmering ovoid the size of a walnut. Its shell was soft white with threads of amber, wrapped in ancient spider silk and lined with curled sage leaves. It had arrived at her doorstep 3 cycles ago, left in the hollow knot of her elderroot stair. No name. No note. Just warmth and the faint scent of time. And last night, for the first time, it had moved. The glade of Dapplecap Hollow was part of the Old Shade, a region so dense with mushrooms that the sky was more idea than fact. Caps layered over caps, their undersides glowing with slow magic. Light came in stripes and petals, pooling beneath the stalks and feeding the mossy floor. The creatures who lived here were small by the reckoning of larger worlds. But this was their entire world. Complex and vast, with kingdoms of beetle folk, hummingbird monarchs in exile, and burrows so deep they curled into dream sleep. In the upper glade, just beneath a leaning sunspore cap, lived the Guild of Wings and Wards, a council of natural wardens and watchers sworn to keep balance between folk and insectum. It was from them that the message came. That morning, as Tansy sipped her tea and the egg warmed gently beside her hearth, the window rattled with the approach of a post beetle, a shining green click scarab with brass armor and scroll tubes strapped to its thorax. "Morning, Jip," Tansy said, opening the latch. The beetle made a low click chuff and spat a scroll with her name on it. She unfurled the leaf-wrapped parchment. To Tansy Midgewing, mushroomwise of Dapplecap Hollow. A pulse of pre-wing energy has been detected in your quadrant. Please report to Guildroot Bow before the moonbell chimes thrice. Bring the object in question, if it has not hatched. Signed, Buzzwick Thindlehook, Guildswarden of the Lower Gills. Tansy exhaled sharply. She turned to the egg. Its shell shimmered. "I suppose we're going out today." Guildroot Bow wasn't on the ground. It clung to the underside of a spiraled mushroom stalk, grown into the bark of a leaning hollowroot tree that had long ago given up trying to stand straight. To reach it, Tansy rode a lanternfly tram, a giant golden-winged insect fitted with a velvet saddle, which buzzed her up past curls of glowing mycelium and glassy raindrop nests. She clutched the egg in both hands, swaddled in a snapdragon pouch. Buzzwick Thindlehook was waiting at the upper perch, a mossy railing that circled the entire gill lobe of the tree. He was a spool-beard gnome, tall for one of their kind, with knotted boots, yellow spectacles, and a voice that always seemed too sharp for such a quiet place. "You're late." "I'm never late," Tansy said, stepping off the tram. "I just arrived with careful timing." Buzzwick eyed the egg. "It's bright," he muttered. "Brighter than the last one." Tansy frowned. "There was a last one?" Buzzwick handed her a folder, stitched beetle leaf, bound in thread. Inside were drawings. Sketches of another egg. Slightly smaller. And notes, cracked gill script with circles and caution marks. It hatched near Greyspore Vale, he said. But what came out didn't stay. Did it fly off? It vanished. And soon after, we lost contact with the crystal wings in that sector. Nothing has returned since. Tansy's hands curled protectively around her egg. Buzzwick continued. Whatever's in there, when it hatches, it must be brought to the glowing nest at the edge of the wild curl. Why? She asked. Because if it's what we think it is, he lowered his voice. It may be the first new chrysalis oracle in 1,000 seasons. That night, back in her home beneath the dapple cap, Tansy lit her hearth with thistle flame and laid the egg on a bed of warm moss. The wind outside shifted. Spores fell lazily through the stalks like snow. She hummed an old lullaby, one from her mother, long faded from her life, and kept the egg close. As she drifted into sleep, something pulled at her dream. She saw wings. Not flapping, but unfolding, petal-wide, luminous. She heard clicking language, like stone on stone. And then a whisper. Not hatch. Choose. She woke with a gasp. The egg was glowing brighter now. A vein of green ran along its spine. Outside her window, a watch-wasp hovered silently. They only appeared when the world changed. Tansy placed a hand on the egg. Who are you? No answer came. But she knew what she had to do. She would travel to the glowing nest. She would protect this life. And if it was a chrysalis oracle, she would make sure it chose well. Even if that meant journeying through the wild curl. Even if that meant facing what no one had faced since the old spores fell. Tansy wasn't fond of rushing, but some things refused to wait. By first light, she had her satchel open on the woven stool beside her window. She packed a sporecloth hood, 2 jars of moss jam, a seed cake wrapped in fern bark, a wax-sealed lantern moth cocoon, for emergencies, and a curling length of root rope braided with shimmer thread. Lastly, she wrapped the egg in a swaddle of star blossom wool and tucked it into a padded sling across her chest. It was warmer now. The green vein running along its shell had thickened. She paused at her door and placed a hand on the lintel, tracing the runes carved there long ago by her gran. For balance, she whispered. Outside, Dapplecap Hollow yawned into morning. Her neighbors were just beginning to stretch and sweep and whisper to one another about dew patterns and snail migrations. Where are you off to, love? Called Auntie Netter from under a sunflower funnel. Just walking west, Tansy called back with a polite smile. West's gone wild, Netter replied, frowning. Watch your feet and your wings, child. Tansy nodded and stepped into the long, cool shadow of the glade, the egg-soft glow guiding her first few steps into the unknown. She didn't go on foot. After half a day's travel along braidroot trails and mist bridges woven between capstalks, Tansy reached a post at the edge of the fringe, a border between the tamed glade and the untended curl of wilderness beyond. A travel beetle waited there. Its name was Grubrick, a stocky old horned ground burrower who'd retired from parcel duty years ago but still took passengers when he liked their smell. Grubrick sniffed the air as Tansy approached, his antennae twitching. Then he clicked once, approval, and lowered his armored shell so she could climb up. They traveled for 2 days. The path wound through spiraled roots and dropped beneath fungi archways strung with mycelial bells. The air grew denser with mist. Colors deepened. Flowers opened only when she looked away. At night, she slept in the crook of Grubrick's leg, warmed by his slow-churned heat and the glow of the egg beside her heart. On the 3rd morning, they crossed a hanging bridge made of lichen sinew and stepped into the wild curl. The wild curl was not like the hollow. There was no clear sky, not even a suggestion of one. The mushroom caps here rose in impossible spirals, overlapping and intertwining like frozen music. The earth pulsed faintly, and some spores drifted upward. It was not dangerous, not in the way sharp things were. But it was unpredictable. And Tansy could feel it immediately. As she walked along a sunless path lined with whispering mysothorns, the egg shifted again. This time, it spoke. Not in words, exactly, but in feelings. A low hum beneath her skin. An ache of memory. She closed her eyes and saw a beetle-folk child staring into a puddle, crying. A glass spider threading starlight between trees. A dark shape hovering over the glowing nest. Then it was gone. The egg cooled again. Tansy opened her eyes. Ahead, the trail split, one path winding upward into a twisting mushroom tower, the other, into a narrow burrow ringed with curled brambles that blinked. She chose the brambles. Not because it looked safe, but because she felt something waiting. Not danger. Recognition. The tunnel opened into a hollow where mothlight glowed from stone and bark, and whisper moss draped from every surface like strands of ancient thought. A voice greeted her, not aloud, but within her bones. You carry what once chose us. Tansy turned slowly. A creature sat at the center of the grotto, a chrysalis oracle, unmistakable, its wings folded like book pages made of memory. Its antennae pulsed slowly. Its body shimmered with age and something older than time. It had no mouth, but it spoke. The wingborn must choose where to land. That is the law. But we help them see the wind. Tansy cradled the egg closer. Then help him. The oracle stirred. Bring him to the nest. But do not enter alone. The ones who forget are waiting there. Who? She asked. But the oracle had turned to stone. The mothlight dimmed. And behind her, the brambles uncurled. She traveled alone now. Grubrick had turned back, his shell humming with discomfort at the oracle's words. The path to the glowing nest was marked only by hollow trails, tunnels where others had passed, but no longer lived. She saw signs of broken harnesses, empty egg shards, and tracks that looped in impossible spirals. The wild curl was bending the path, trying to confuse her. But the egg still pulsed gently. It wanted to go forward. So she trusted it. She camped in a cap cavern ringed with glowing puff trails that sneezed a cloud whenever she shifted. And on the fourth morning since the oracle, she saw it. Rising from the mist like a second sun. The glowing nest. The nest was not what she expected. It was not built but grown, sprawling across the top of a spiraled whitecap mushroom large enough to shade a grove. Its outer layers were latticed with silver thread fungus, wound tightly like a woven basket, and pulsed with a low bioluminescent glow, like heartbeats in light. Tiny doorways opened into hollow tunnels. Luminescent moths drifted in lazy loops above it. The air smelled of warm bark and old pollen. Tansy stood at the edge for a long while. The egg was hot now, but in a way that comforted rather than warned. It pulsed slowly, in rhythm with the nest itself. She took a breath and stepped inside. The inner chamber of the nest was quiet. Sound didn't echo, but it didn't vanish either, it just folded itself gently into the walls. There, seated on a platform carved from milkstone, was a nest warden. She was part mushroom, part root, and part something older, her face shaped like bark smoothed by wind, her eyes soft and moss-colored. You've come far, Tansy Midgewing, she said without moving her lips. How do you know my name? Tansy asked. We know many things here. Especially what the eggs remember. Tansy unwrapped the bundle from her satchel and placed the egg on a velvet patch of biolace. It's ready, she said softly. No, the nest warden replied. You are. The room darkened, not with shadow, but with stillness. All the soft lights dimmed. Even the glowing moss turned down its brightness, as if watching. The egg cracked. The first split was silent. The second whispered. Then it bloomed. From the shell unfurled a being no larger than a button, a larva with transparent wings curled tightly to its body. Antennae twitching, legs shaking with newness. But it did not seem afraid. It looked at Tansy. And she heard its voice. Name me. Tansy knelt. That's not mine to do. It is now. She hesitated. Then, after a long, careful breath, "Your name is?" "Wink." It shivered. Glowed. "Accepted." The nest warden bowed her head. "He has chosen you." "Chosen?" Tansy asked. "Chosen for what?" "To carry him until he becomes what he is meant to be. To protect him from what watches beneath." Tansy blinked. What watches beneath what? But before the nest warden could answer, the earth shook. The nest walls rippled. Dust fell from the ceiling. Moth light darted away like scattered sparks. "Stay here," the nest warden said. But Wink clung to Tansy's shoulder, trembling, not with fear, but urgency. Then the sound came. Not thunder. Buzzing. From below. The nest warden's face changed for the first time, her calm broken by old memory. "They've found us." "Who?" Tansy asked, shielding Wink. The answer came with the tearing of the earth. A breach opened in the floor, ripped not by roots, but by mandibles. Dozens of them. From the hole poured insects, but not of the natural kind. These were pale, bloated things, exoskeletons cracked and patched with lichen rot. Their wings fluttered out of sync. Their eyes held nothing. And from behind them emerged a form cloaked in spider thread. A collector. "Back," the nest warden hissed, raising her hands. The collector didn't speak. It simply extended a tendril toward Wink. The larva glowed, violently. And then, as if awakened by its own name, it sang. It wasn't a song like music. It was a song like memory. Like moss regrowing where it had been torn. Like a breeze moving through a broken stalk and making something whole. Wink's wings unfurled. They were made of light. The collector reeled. The rot thing shrieked and scattered, unable to stand before the brightness. Tansy felt warmth flood through her, the same warmth she had felt the night the egg had moved for the first time. The nest warden placed a hand on her shoulder. "He's an oracle." "I thought they only existed in the deep past," Tansy breathed. "Then this is the deep future." And just like that, the nest began to shift. Glowing strands of cap fiber curled around the breach, sealing it. The fungus pulsed with power. And Wink stopped singing. For now. The nest was no longer safe. "The collector won't stop," the nest warden said, leading Tansy to an upper perch overlooking the wild curl canopy. "It'll try again. Stronger. It will send itself, next time." "But why?" Tansy asked, holding Wink gently in her hands. "Because Wink is not simply a creature. He is a tuning. He carries the memory of balance. And they," her eyes narrowed, "they feed on imbalance." "You mean they eat chaos?" "They eat story breaks," the nest warden said. "Lost ends. Unlived lives. And right now, Wink is the loudest song the world has sung in an age." Tansy looked out over the glowing fields of mushroom caps, each one humming with color. "Where do we go?" "Anywhere up," the nest warden said. "Find the wind. Let Wink see the world. Let him choose his wings." Wink climbed to her shoulder, blinking all 6 of his soft gold eyes. And the air shifted. Somewhere far above, the glass flames were circling again. It started as a sound, like the ringing of dewdrops on silk. Then came the shimmer. The sky above the wild curl canopy rippled with color as glass flames, the great dragonflies of the upper shroud, descended in slow, spiraling formation. Their wings trailed light. Their eyes pulsed with ancient memory. Some were green as sap. Others gold, violet, even translucent. They circled the glowing nest like a parade of silent omens. Wink trembled with recognition. "They've come for him," said the nest warden, voice tight with reverence. "They're going to take him?" Tansy asked, gripping her satchel strap. "Not take. Invite." And then, impossibly, one of the glass flames began to descend. Its light grew warmer, its hum louder. It hovered just above the nest's highest cap, wings outstretched, body longer than a vine hammock. It tilted slightly. Waiting. Wink climbed onto Tansy's hand. "You're not leaving me," she said quietly. "Not yet." He turned toward her and blinked once. Then, slowly, his wings unfurled, not just light this time, but structure. Gossamer thin. Iridescent. Still too small for true flight, but forming. The glass flame pulsed once. And a tether of light lowered, just enough for them both to grasp. The nest warden's voice came as they rose into the sky. "Whatever happens next, remember, Wink is not just a creature. He is a reminder." Tansy didn't understand what that meant. Not yet. The ride was unlike anything Tansy had known. The wind above the canopy wasn't wild, it was alive. It danced around them like a curious stream, nudging and guiding. The glass flame they rode vibrated at frequencies that made the clouds shimmer into shapes, old faces, echoing trails, fractal spirals. They passed through fog zones where pollen storms danced in place, and through cloud roots, vast, hanging tendrils of condensation that reached down like skyvines, dripping memory in the form of dew. Wink stayed close to her shoulder, occasionally tasting the mist with his antennae. As they crested a spore-drift ridge, the glass flame spiraled down into a calm hollow of air. There, floating on an updraft like a living platform, was something wondrous. A nest in the sky. Unlike the glowing nest, this one shimmered with transparency. It was woven from wings, abandoned, gifted, or transformed. Suspended by nothing. Humming with presence. Upon its platform stood 3 figures, tiny like her, yet touched with something more. Each held a miniature lantern carved from shed beetle horn, and each had the soft shimmer of chrysalis memory in their gaze. "Welcome, Tansy Midgewing," one said. "And welcome, young oracle." Tansy stepped carefully from the dragonfly's back. "What is this place?" The tallest of the 3, shaped like a waxbark moth, with silver eyes, stepped forward. "We are the wing tenders. And this is where Wink must begin to remember who he used to be." Tansy stayed for 5 days. The nest in the sky moved with the wind, but always gently, and never farther than a glass flame's wing beat from the upper glade. The wing tenders taught Wink how to move through air currents, how to balance his new wings, how to hum soft frequencies that wouldn't wake the wrong spores. They also began to teach him something stranger. Memory flights. "I don't understand," Tansy said on the second evening, sitting with the moth-like wing tender by a fire fueled by glass-cap petals. "How can he remember things he never lived?" "Because," the wing tender said, "Wink wasn't born in the usual sense. He was compiled. Made from forgotten choices, leftover dreams, and what was meant to happen but didn't." "Made by who?" "Not made by. Chosen by." Tansy's heart skipped. She looked over at Wink, who was gently glowing and tracing spirals in the air with his wings. "You mean he's a story that almost was?" "Exactly. And he's waking into one now." But stories are never safe when they become aware of themselves. That night, Tansy dreamed of broken scrolls and spinning beetle lanterns in the dark. The next day, Wink vanished. One moment he was floating near the wind spire where he slept. The next, gone. No buzz. No flicker. Just gone. Tansy panicked. The wing tenders scoured the currents. Glass flames wheeled overhead in tighter circles. Then they found it. A hole. Not torn fabric. Not a rip in the air. But a literal absence, a place where wind refused to exist, where spores wouldn't fall, and where no sound echoed. A story break. The moth wing tender paled. "They've found him." "Who?" Tansy demanded. "The collectors?" "No," she whispered. "The endlings." The endlings didn't chase or attack. They unwrote. They were insectum once, beetles, moths, even wasps, but broken by forgetting. Now, they fed on gaps. They fluttered on empty wings and moved without moving. Inside the hole, Tansy saw them. They hovered over Wink like shadows that couldn't cast light, surrounding him, whispering in reverse. He was still glowing. But barely. Tansy didn't hesitate. She leapt into the hole, her own breath vanishing instantly. No echo. No color. Only Wink. She reached for him. The endlings turned. Their faces were her own. Tansy couldn't move, not because her body refused, but because movement no longer existed in the hollow where she stood. The endlings hovered before her, their limbs trembling slightly, as if in constant stuttered motion. And their faces, somehow, were versions of herself. One had moss-colored curls like hers, but blank glass eyes. Another wore her satchel across a torn tunic. One wept continuously, as if their story had ended mid-sentence and never found peace. They surrounded Wink. He didn't fight them. He simply glowed dimly, small wings folded close, his eyes fluttering like candles in a cold room. Tansy clenched her jaw. She spoke, not with words, but with intention. You do not own what I've forgotten. The endlings paused. Their heads tilted. You gave us your maybes, said one. You're not quites. You're almosts. And now you want them back, she asked. No, the weeping one stepped forward. We want to finish. Tansy stepped between them and Wink. You don't get to finish through him. She opened her satchel and pulled out the egg's old shell, the fragments she'd carried with her ever since the hatching. She scattered the pieces at their feet. You already had your beginning, she said, her voice steady. Let him have his. The endlings screamed. But no sound came. And then they were gone. Wink collapsed into her hands, limp and pale, but breathing. The hole began to collapse behind them, folding in on itself like a memory returning to silence. Wind returned in hesitant sighs, stirring her hair, then stronger with each second. She looked down. Wink's wings had grown. Not just longer, but layered. A second set unfurled from beneath the first, shimmering with glass-like transparency and veins of pale gold. His eyes opened. But they were different. Sharper. Older. Brighter. You remembered me, he whispered, not with his mouth, but with his wings. I never forgot, Tansy said, though part of her realized she had, not him, but the hope he represented. The thread of wonder she'd set aside when the hollow grew too quiet. He fluttered from her hand, hovered at eye level. Then he sang again. And this time, the world responded. The air around them rippled, like a curtain pulled gently in and out of reality. Tiny lines of color formed in the sky, then threads, red, green, gold, soft blue, crisscrossing above the canopy. The wind coiled along these threads, forming shapes, old stories. Forgotten ones. Wink was not calling them. He was mending them. Each song note he sang pulled a thread from the void, readying it to the present. Storylines lost to the endlings, paths that had unraveled, possibilities left behind, all of them reconnected, gently, carefully. Tansy stood at the center of it, amazed. The wing tenders arrived behind her, their lanterns dimmed in reverence. He's forming a stitch wind, whispered the moth-like elder. It hasn't happened since the first nest bloomed. Is it dangerous? No. It's healing. But healing can bring pain. The world will remember things it tried to bury. And far below, deep in the wild curl, something stirred. The burrow didn't crack open so much as withdraw from itself. From deep below the mushroom forests, under spore banks and rotted glades, rose the collector. But it was not like before. Its spider-thread cloak now pulsed with borrowed light. And in its wake, beetle folk wandered with vacant eyes, victims of memory disassembly, their stories half-remembered, their dreams scavenged. The collector did not speak. It simply walked, gathering pieces of the world it could not understand, and storing them in the hollows of its segmented body. When it looked up at the stitch wind forming above, it tilted its head. And then it whispered, mine. That night, the stitch wind reached its crescendo. Across the Caplan's and mycelial hills, every creature who had lost someone, or something, felt a tug in their chest. A forgotten smell. A familiar word. A laugh long buried. Even the stars flickered with old syllables. Tansy sat on the edge of the nest in the sky, Wink curled in her lap, his breath faintly glowing. He was tired now. Not physically, but in the way a storyteller tires when all tales have been spoken at once. The wing tenders approached silently. "You've done what no oracle has done," said the elder. "You've not just recalled stories, you've rewoven them." Wink stirred. "It's not finished," he whispered. "Something still breaks things." Tansy looked downward. Far below, the glade lights flickered. And one by one, went out. They came down from the sky. Not in haste, but in purpose. The stitch wind still shimmered overhead, steady, humming, quietly healing, but now something darker was rising beneath it, trying to unmake. The wing tenders offered her tools before she left, a pinch of threaded dusk, for hiding, a jar of wind-spun sap, to mend memory, and a cloak sewn from mothwing shed during the stitchwind itself. But most of all, they offered their silence, a kind of solemn hope, or maybe a promise unspoken. Tansy rode a glass flame once more, Wink curled in her satchel now bright as fire under cloth. They flew beneath the wind routes, through tunnels carved in the upper canopy by generations of dragonflies and spores, and reached the edge of the hollow by sundown. Only it wasn't the hollow anymore. Dapplecap Hill was dark. Not nighttime dark, but forgotten dark. No lights in the windows. No thistle lamps hung. No click-scarab trails. No pollen music. As they landed in the soft moss outside her old mushroom home, Tansy saw it. Her own door was open. And someone, something, had been inside. The scent was the first clue. Familiar, but wrong. Like an old tea blend turned sour with time. Fungal, damp, and laced with the brittle smell of dried-out memory. The interior of her cap den looked untouched, at first. The chair was where she left it. The hearth was still cold. But every object was just slightly wrong. Her tea jar labeled mint moss now said morning root. Her favorite spoon was now made of thornwood, not riverstone. The egg's old resting pillow was gone. "This is a memory made by someone else," Wink whispered from her shoulder. Tansy's throat tightened. "But it looks like mine. It wants to be yours. So you won't notice." They turned to leave, but the doorway had closed. No sound. No motion. Just sealed, as if it had never been open at all. And then came the whisper. "You could stay here." Tansy spun. A figure sat in her old reading nook. It wore her face, but younger. Smoother. Hopeful. "You remember how warm this place was," it said. "You could live that again. Without fear. Without burden." Tansy didn't answer. She took a step back. "You deserve it," the figure continued. "No more journeys. No more loss. No more becoming." Wink hissed, low and bright. Tansy drew her windspun sap from her cloak. "No," she said. And smeared the jar against the air. The false captain melted away like honey under heat. The door reappeared, this time with frayed edges, as though barely holding to the present. Tansy stepped through. And into darkness. Not the gentle dark of night, but the absolute absence of story. A void where nothing had ever been told, and thus nothing could exist unless you brought it with you. She held Wink tightly. "Stay with me. I'm always with you." Together, they stepped forward. And the collector greeted them. The collector no longer wore spider thread. It had shed its disguise. Now it stood revealed, tall as a rooted capstem, segmented and branching, with dozens of half-formed eyes and mouths. It was a patchwork of creatures that had almost existed. Its voice was dozens layered into one. "You carried something precious." Tansy held Wink close, cloak tight. "He is not yours. He is everyone's." No, she said firmly. He is his. The collector reached out, its limbs forming a cage, each finger made of a different lost possibility. Tansy stepped backward, but there was nowhere left to go. The void rippled. And Wink glowed. Not defensively this time. Not in fear. But an invitation. He floated from her arms. Faced the collector. And sang. Wink's voice, if it could be called that, was made of layered sound and sensation. Of dew on moss, of story readings by lanternlight, of laughter over spore bread and the warmth of a home you chose. His light surrounded the collector. Not burning, but illuminating. Every unformed face on its body began to flicker, some smiling, some crying, some crumbling into ash. And then, it stopped resisting. The collector began to fall apart, not shattered, not destroyed. Released. Its fragments drifted upward like memory embers, each one sparking a faint outline of a tale never told, now ready to begin somewhere new. When it was gone, Wink hovered in silence. His wings had changed again. Not larger. Just complete. He turned to Tansy. It's time. The world came back in pieces. Color returned to the hollow. The spores sang again. The burrow-light bell rang once. The stitch wind still curled in the sky, but no longer in a rush, it now moved with peace. Tansy stood beneath her old dapple cap, now real again, now hers again. Wink perched in the air before her, wings folding gently. I must go where I can't be followed. She nodded, swallowing the ache. But you'll remember me? Always, he said. Because you let me choose. She smiled. And he flew upward. Soaring past the caps, past the wind lines, into the heart of the stitchwind itself. There, he dissolved into light. Not gone. But woven. The wind calmed. The glade softened. One by one, the lights in Dapplecap Hollow returned, not all at once, but in flickers, like fireflies regaining courage. Windows glowed again. Pollen lanterns were hung from curled vine hooks. The moss paths resumed their lazy pulse of life. But not all who lived here remembered what had happened. Some thought there had been a long sleep. Others recalled strange dreams of their younger selves. A few carried the memory of a soft hum in the sky and felt a peace they couldn't explain. Only Tansy remembered everything. She stood beneath her Dapplecap home, now trimmed with a new line of woven thistle and moss stitch. Her satchel, once home to Wink, now carried jars of wild light nectar and a small crystal fragment, a piece of his shell, saved when he flew. Each morning, she lit her teacup stove. Stirred her clover broth. Watered the moss window box. Whispered to the wind. She did not cry. Not because she didn't miss him, but because the hollow had no room for that kind of sorrow anymore. The stitchwind had changed things. Grief here wasn't a wound. It was a woven thing. The first visitor came on the back of a snail. She was a mushroom tender from the southeast fronds, pale-furred and feather-hatted, with a notebook full of spores gone wrong and moss that wouldn't listen to reason. She'd heard of Tansy's journey from a wasp keeper 2 glades over and asked for help translating a dream her beetles had shared. Tansy brewed tea and listened, nodding occasionally, offering suggestions. The next week, 2 more came. A young mosskind child with a moth-shaped birthmark, dreaming in light sounds. An old beetlefolk teacher with half-memories of a creature he swore had once been his student. By mid-spring, her porch had become a place of quiet talk and slow repair. Tansy didn't mind. She missed adventure. But more than that, she loved the pause after it. On the 3rd Thistleday of Bloom Month, a beetle courier arrived, wearing a new brass mail plate and carrying a wax-sealed scroll threaded with stitch fiber. Tansy opened it carefully. It read. To the Rememberer of Dapplecap. Wink has entered the skyfold. He sings often. A new oracle has emerged in the northeast fog belt, she hums in pattern. Others will follow. You are not forgotten. The wing tenders. Tansy pressed the scroll to her heart and exhaled. The world was changing. Not loudly. Not fast. But surely. She still walked the glade paths at dusk, cup of nettlebrew in hand. She still swept her stoop of soft leaf. She still paused each evening to light the little lamp beside her door, a ritual as much as a necessity. One night, as the spores drifted golden and the stars peeked low, she saw it. A flicker of light, not from her lamp. Hovering at the edge of her garden. Small. Winged. Familiar. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. She smiled. Wink was still flying. And beneath the red-capped sky, the glade pulsed gently with stories not lost, but waiting. Tansy turned toward her door. Tomorrow, someone else might knock. And she would be ready. The end.